Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Lauren Etter's book, The Devil's Playbook. I'll talk very briefly about the author, going over to an overview of what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I will be reading for next time. Lauren Etter is an investigative journalist. She's written for the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Times, very established journalist. This is, the best of my understanding, her first book. And what the book is an investigative report into the founding of Juul, roughly from 2005, the e-cigarette maker, to its sell to what is now known as Altria, which was formerly known as Philip Morris, just a few years ago, a little bit of the aftermath of that. But it's really, I would say, a broad look at the cigarette industry circa the year 2000, after the Master Settlement Agreement had been put in place, basically to get the federal government and states attorneys off the back of Philip Morris. There was a huge settlement and payouts that I think are still going on and will be going on for several years to pay for some of the long-term health impacts that the state had ponied up to assist those who were had health problems due to long-term smoking. So the book starts in roughly the year 2000 with Philip Morris having gone through that, and that is kind of in parallel told with the story of the rise of Juul, the e-cigarette vaping device that was founded. The idea, I think, started in 2005 from two Stanford graduates who were in a design class, and the kind of contrast of those two cultures, you have a very, very old school hierarchical corporation with Philip Morris, and you have what was essentially a tech startup with Juul. And I think the underlining point of the book is that as much as they don't want to admit it, over the course of the creation and selling of the company, they become more and more like a tobacco company and less of like a tech startup. That's kind of like the underlining point of the book. You also do see why Philip Morris was constrained in their ability to innovate due to really cultural reasons, but also legal and economic reasons. So that, I thought it was a fascinating look from all corners. I think she does a very good job of setting the stage for you historically if you're not aware of, the cigarette industry circa 2000 and how the Master Settlement Agreement that occurred in the mid-90s kind of sets the stage really for this entire book. E-cigarettes are something that is a part of that, is separate from that, and because they're separate from that and not covered by the Master Settlement Agreement, certain things don't apply to e-cigarette makers that do apply to big tobacco, and that becomes kind of some of the conflict in the story. In some ways, it's an innovator's dilemma story, but it's in other ways not, because of the constraints that are put on big tobacco that really are not put on the e-cigarette manufacturers. So I thought all that was really, really interesting. I think she does a good job of making it very brisk. It's a really readable book. I read it in like 2 or 3 days. I think it's well written. There's some word choices that sometimes she throws out words that are really not in common usage that I found kind of puzzling at times. It pulled me out of it a little bit. But other than that, I think it's well written, well researched. Overall, I really enjoyed it. There's very few things that I had problems with it, and they're mostly nitpicky things. The afterword I didn't really care for as much. It felt kind of tacked on. I think the obvious title for this book is Sympathy for the Devil. I mean, really, that's what the book is about, is realizing that these cigarette makers have this platonic idea of this device being used by people to wean themselves off smoking. However, that's not really what their marketing pushes forward, especially in the beginning, and then they begin dealing with the rise of teen smokers and underage smokers. They don't really know how to handle that. And so they're left really holding the bag in some ways. They're also pinned, maybe unfairly, with some things dealing with unauthorized use of the products, which they also have very little control over. So it really ultimately is you basically looking at, this company that's supposed to be a vanguard of the future of getting people off this really dangerous and disgusting habit, ultimately seems to be pretty okay with hooking kids on nicotine. And that's kind of the conflict in the book. And you realize that for whatever your feelings on the big tobacco companies, they've basically drawn a line in the sand since the year 2000 of not marketing to teenage smokers. At least that's the impression. The only other problem I had with the book, I'm just looking at my notes real quick. I didn't really know if she had full access to the two founders of Juul, because I think that to me is kind of where the rubber hit the road in some ways. And there were some choices made by the company that it could have been kind of one of a few different reasons. And I felt there was maybe a little bit of access lacking there. There's also an early venture capitalist whose name is, I believe, Vashani. And I think he also, I don't know if she got full access to him, but those are the kind of the perspectives that I think were maybe missing a little bit. The only other thing that I could say would be, I felt that there were a couple sections that felt superfluous that maybe could have been cut back, that didn't really add overall to the effect of the story, but those are pretty few and far between. Overall, I think it was a really enjoyable read, other than those nitpicks. If you've read Barbarians at the Gate, is really the obvious one. I'll leave a link to my review for that below. But if you read that and kind of were wondering, well, what was the future of the e-cigarette and what happened after to the tobacco industry, that book in some ways really, there's a gap of about 10 years between the end of Barbarians at the Gate and really the beginning of this book. But you still see in that book the seeds of this book. In the master settlement agreement, that all started really happening with testimony by big tobacco executives that's mentioned in this book that's from the mid-'80s, so it's around that time. So it really kind of does all weave together pretty well. If you're someone who just has no knowledge whatsoever about Juul and e-cigarettes, I think it does a really good job of explaining to you why people would be so into this product and how there's kind of a culture that kind of rises around it. So I think there's a lot there to really enjoy. Like I said, it's a pretty quick read. I don't know how much I learned or how much is going to stick with me, but in the time that I read it, I enjoyed it quite a bit. You do get a sense of really the federal government's response to these things, and just kind of if you think that the tobacco companies are slow to act, the federal government is one ladder down from that, so they're even slower to act than the big tobacco companies, who are very slow to act compared to the tech industry. So you have kind of these different layers of speed that people move at. You know, I thought it was a really fascinating look from a business standpoint of, you know, you have a product, you're kind of locked in, and you have kind of the CEO of Philip Morris is in some ways kind of given Sophie's choice of, does he continue watching kind of his flagship product dwindle year by year and is really unable to compete in this space for reasons that are beyond his control in some ways, or does he make a huge gamble and buy this competitor for what turns out to be probably 13 or 14x what they're really worth? So as of this writing, you know, who knows what'll happen in the future. But so I thought that from all that standpoint, I thought it was really fascinating. If someone into business or into someone into public health, I think you'll get a lot out of Lauren Etter, The Devil's Playbook. So until next time, where I'll be reading The Black Tongue Thief, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment in the comment section below if you have read this, if you have any thoughts about it. I'd like to hear them. Until next time, bye.